There's a very useful tool there, that store lamb finishing calculator. Check out your lambs, see what weight bands you have, the number of lambs in the various different weight categories, and plug them into that calculator, and you'll have the figures there. It'll tell you exactly what's in it, and then you can make an informed decision. Do you keep lambs? Do you feed lambs? Do you sell lambs? What option do you do?
Hello, I'm Kieran Lynch, and welcome to OviCast, the Teagasc Sheep podcast. Each episode will bring you the latest insights, advice, and technical updates for the sheep industry. We're rejoined by Michael Gottstein in the second part of the episode on store lambs. This time we're focusing on those purchasing and finishing lambs. We talk about the importance of getting health treatments in place when these lambs arrive on the farm and what impact that can have on them. We discuss the expected performance, diets, mineral nutrition, particularly for those finishing lambs intensively. We hear now from Michael.
Store lambs have been a very profitable enterprise. If we go back over the last 10 or 12, 13 years, they're, by and large, people have made money, on store lambs every year, and nice money in a lot of the years. So it's quite a good and can be a potentially very profitable enterprise. Look at the main thing for those lambs is when they come onto the farm. We're probably coming to the end or getting close to the end of shearing lambs, but generally I would say for lambs prior to October, be a benefit in shearing them just to keep them out of briars and bushes and things like that. The big thing, I suppose, in terms of those lambs when they come onto the farms, what we're seeing is a lot of those lambs don't have high egg counts in terms of stomach worms. They're generally very naive, but particularly when they come onto a sheep farm, pick up worms very, very quickly. So they get infected very, very quickly on the sheep ground, and you just need to be conscious of that even if we're dosing those lambs coming onto the farm, they probably need to be dosed again about a month later, or certainly do an egg count to see how they're doing a month later, and keep an eye on that. Things like liver fluke, we probably need to be conscious of that. Sheep scab and lice and things like that. So if we can, a dip for those dipping those sheep, proper plunge dipping is what we'd be looking at doing there. For small numbers of farm, we're just bringing on a small number, maybe an injectable macrocyclic lactone as part of the stomach worm control, and also controlling the scab there would suffice. But for bigger numbers, we'd generally be looking to dip them. And that's great in terms of getting rid of everything. Proper dipping gets rid of not only the sheep scab, but also any lice that they have and any ticks that they'll have as well. So it's great in terms of cleaning them up. Lameness is a big issue, and we need to just keep on top of that. So avoid buying lambs that are lame, bringing them onto the farm and then just keeping an eye on them, and regular foot bathing to keep on top of that. And look at any lame sheep that are there, pull them out, and treat them as a separate group until they're cleared up before they're moved back in. And look at in Athenry here, when we're bringing lambs into Athenry for our store lamb trials there, we vaccinate them for ORF, and we vaccinate them for Clostridial and Pastorella, and that's because we've lost lambs with both of those diseases. So I think that's generally something that people will be conscious of. If you've had issues with ORF in the past, you might consider vaccinating for ORF, but certainly I would consider strongly advocate vaccinating those lambs for Clostridial disease and Pastorella pneumonia, because in particular if you're buying from lots of different farms, and it's a stressful period for those lambs, so they will be kind of susceptible to those change of ground and all that type of thing. So going in there when you get them with the 2 shots, the first shot, and then 4 weeks later, 6 weeks later, giving them the second shot, it's a small price to pay. One lamb will pay for the vaccinations of an awful, one dead lamb pay for the vaccines of an awful lot of lambs. So I'd be going in there with that as well. Look at general, I suppose it's grass when we bring them down, grass, and then slowly introduce them to whatever diets that they're going to be going on to. So if they're going on to forage crops, it's a grass at the start, and then basically introducing them slowly to the forage crop diet. Or if we're grass forage crop and subsequently going on to meal, training them to the meal in time, so that we can get them onto the meal diet when we need them to be finishing off that meal.
And look, similarly, Michael, again, this is where the calculator comes in handy, being realistic about that finish time on either of those scenarios, particularly where you go to start to introduce some concentrate, you can eat into your margin quite a lot there if you don't go at the right time and have enough frame put on first.
Yeah, generally it's hard enough to get to see the economics working out if you start feeding lambs under 38 kilos. Obviously that's a function of how much you bought them for and all that type of thing. But generally, what we would have seen in a lot of the trials in Athenry, even with those 25 kilo lambs or lighter lambs, like, you need to kind of bring them up to kind of 36, 37 kgs before you'd even consider starting to put them onto the meal. And like generally they'll do that with good grass, or, in over kind of a 3-4 month period. And then basically you're going in with the meal and supplementing them with meal to get them, in our case in Athenry, I suppose we were putting them into the shed and finishing them on ad lib diets with some forage supplement, but mostly meat. The meal was doing the business first there. Or, I know there are people who have them outside on foraged crops or on grass, and they basically go in with hoppers and start meal feeding. But really, I suppose you're probably talking about a lamb 37, 38 kgs would want to be at that kind of live weight before you go into that really intensive meal feeding, finishing system. And they finish very, very quickly at that stage. It works quite well and is quite profitable, I suppose, if you get them up to that stage. Feeding those lighter lambs and putting an awful lot of meal in for a prolonged period of time, that can run up a very, very big meal bill very, very quickly.
So again, here's where the weight banding comes in. Particularly as you move towards that finishing period, it's no harm have that group split. Have your heavier finishing group ready to go on. And as you indicated there, like when they do go in on that intensive feeding, they will finish quite quickly. Mm-hmm. Even for those light or hill lambs, carcass fatness, and that can become an issue. Michael, just on the more intensive end of it, like for the rations they're using at that stage of the season, and watch out for there.
Yeah, so look at I suppose in terms of rations with anyone who would be feeding smaller lambs, like, a little bit of meal, maybe creeping them because the grass isn't good quality, you probably want a little bit of extra protein there because those lambs have a good bit of growing to do. So we generally be talking about maybe a 16%, 16% protein ration. For those lighter or heavier lambs, then when you're just doing the finishing, really look at the protein is not that terribly important. It's energy that we're looking to put into the diet. So 13, 14% protein rations would be absolutely plenty for those lambs. And really what you're looking at is the energy density of the ration. So really good quality energy dense ingredients such as barley, wheat, maize, pulp, distillers, things like that have a really good energy content to them, are I suppose what's best. And then I suppose it's a trade-off between the price of those ingredients and the value of them. So is maize better value than barley, or we'd be putting in maybe bits of hulls and things like that as well to get a bit of energy in there, but also to get a bit of fiber in there. And again, it's a trade-off between the real Rolls-Royce rations that, are probably really good at everything, but maybe, a lot more expensive per unit than maybe some of the cheaper. So really, it's about farmers looking at what are the quality ingredients. Again, I must stress that very often, rations are sold on a protein basis, and people think that if they're getting a higher protein ration, it's better and they're getting something for free, or better value. When you're finishing lambs, these kind of 18, 19, 20% protein rations, they're not what we want for those lambs. We really want a low energy, a low protein, high energy ration there. So look for your cereals, your pulps, your maize, your barley, your bits of oats, wheat, beet pulp, citrus pulp. Those are the type of ingredients that are going to try and drive those performance figures for us on the lambs. Not too much starch. So I know there's an awful lot of very high maize diets out there, and they work fine if they have forage and if they're well managed. But the problem with some of those really high cereal based diets is if things go wrong, you can end up with lambs with acidosis very quickly and lambs going down. So the management needs to be really good. So we generally saying look at the starch and sugar levels in those diets, like, and they probably should be under kind of 25%, and we should be looking at having a kind of a fiber level of at least kind of 8 or 9% in those rations, and that makes it a little bit safer. So when you're looking at the label, you will see some of those figures, and certainly the fiber figure should be there. And I'd be saying, look, that should be somewhere around 8 or 9% fiber, crude fiber, for just to keep the ration safe and keep the rumen ticking over. The other thing I suppose then is look at there's coarse versus nuts. And, obviously coarse rations are a little bit cheaper to make. They don't have to be milled, and, some people even go with kind of blends and things like that. And, so on the one side, I suppose you have the cheaper production cost of those. The flip side of that is that, in my opinion, anytime we've used or seen coarse rations being used, they tend to draw an awful lot of birds. It seems to be very hard to keep crows and pigeons and things like that out of the shed and away from the feeders when you're feeding a lot of coarse ration. Lambs also sort those ingredients, tend to maybe sort out some of the less digestible or tasty ingredients, and they seem to spill them out of the trucks or the feeders, and that's waste and things like that. So just look at, you need to, I suppose farmers need to weigh that up and see, is there a benefit in having a coarse ration and trying to deal with crows and birds and lamb sorting ingredients inside in trucks and feeders versus going with a nut, paying a little bit more for the nut, probably having a more uniform product. It doesn't settle out as easily in transport. Minerals and things like that are much better bound inside in the nuts. You have a more uniform product, no sorting, less issues with crows. Now you'll still have issues with crows with nuts, but I mean less issues, I think, than with the coarser type feeds, but a little bit higher cost in terms of the purchasing of those products. The other thing, I suppose, look at, Kieran, a lot of people finishing lambs, maybe in particular if they're doing it on a small scale, might be buying the ration in bags. And, there is a very big extra cost in buying lamb ration in 4-stone bags or 25-kilo bags. And just to be aware of that, versus buying it in bulk, tipped into a shed somewhere or blown into a bin, or even these mini bins that you have now, these kind of plastic 3/4 ton bins where the farmer can go and collect it and get it at a cheaper price. So look at, just weigh up the options. Generally I'd say could be a €30 price differential between bulk versus small bag, and just if you're feeding a lot of lambs, that obviously adds up at the end of the year. So just be conscious of that as well.
Michael, just in terms of that finishing ration, the importance of having a suitable mineral mix in that, how vital is that, particularly in the case of those finishing ram lambs?
Yep. So I suppose look at it, generally, I would say for very short keep lambs, I wouldn't be overly worried about minerals. So I mean, somebody who's feeding lambs for 3 or 4 weeks, in particular if they're on a forage-based diet, and there's a small little bit of something like barley or a bit of maize going in there just to help put a bit of condition on them, that's probably fine. But for the longer keep type lambs or longer finishing periods, I think it's important that the ration is properly balanced. So that might be somebody who has their own cereals, and they're basically either buying a balancer nut, so that's a nut with a bit of maybe protein and some minerals in it, or they're basically licensed to mix, have a home mixing system, and they approve the various different paperwork to allow them to do that, and they're buying a mineral mix and putting it through some sort of a mixer. Or somebody who's going and buying a proprietary mix and that has a mineral in it, and I think that's important. So for the where we're feeding lambs a significant amount of meal, and in particular for longer periods of time, it is important that it's properly balanced, has the appropriate mineral vitamin mix, and very important when we're finishing lambs, Kieran, is that we have included in that ammonium chloride. Okay, so ammonium chloride basically is a mineral a substance that we add to the mineral mix, and it's to reduce the incidence of urinary calculi. So urinary calculi in store lambs is basically where the crystals form in the urine, and they basically block the waterworks. So basically, the ram lamb or the wether lamb is unable to urinate, and it's a fatal condition basically because they can't urinate and the bladder ruptures and the lambs will die from that. It is kind of magnesium and calcium crystals that form in the urine that create the problem, and it's generally something that's associated with intensive meal feeding. So there are a number of options to prevent that. One is to add salt to the ration, and the salt basically encourages the lambs to drink lots of water. And what you hope there is that they flush out the minerals or these little crystals as they're forming in the urine before they get to the size that they create blockages. So that salt prevents urinary calculi by basically promoting excess water intake, and lots of urination. The challenge, I suppose, with that is it depends on them having water available. And also there are issues there, I suppose, in terms of bedding, even on slats. If they're drinking lots of water, you have lots of moisture, and that has issues in terms of ventilation and things like that as well. So better again than salt is to use ammonium chloride. Ammonium chloride we generally include at about 0.5% of the diet. So 5 kgs per ton of ammonium chloride would be what the most manufacturers will be putting in there. And the benefit of including ammonium chloride is that we don't depend on the lambs to drink the water. The ammonium chloride, what that does is it changes the pH of the urine, and it prevents the crystals from forming in the first place. So it's probably a better system for controlling urinary calculi in high-risk diets on farms where we've had problems with with urinary calculi. They might even put in a little bit more, even up to maybe 0.8 or 1% ammonium chloride into the ration in those high-risk situations to try and prevent those crystals from forming. So look at anyone who's going feeding lambs significant amounts of concentrate feed to finish them, ad lib or very intensive finishing systems. What I would say is, make sure there is a proper lamb finishing mineral in there. It is important that the diet is balanced for things like calcium and phosphorus and things like that. Those ratios are important, but also make sure that there is an antidiuretic in there to make sure that we don't get urinary calculi. And for most people, that's going to be ammonium chloride, 0.5% of ammonium chloride in the ration to prevent that from happening. And that'll basically save our lambs and prevent headaches further on down the line.
There really is no shortcuts for those in that intensive finishing system.
Absolutely. Look at just one comment on that as well. In bull finishing systems, there are a lot of rations out there with added buffers to kind of maintain the rumen pH and prevent acidosis and things like that. And those buffers don't work for lambs, primarily for the reason that they knock out the ammonium chloride. So just be careful. Kind of, bull finishing rations are probably not suitable for lambs. Some of these treated grains and things like that, insofar as that the risk of urinary calculi can be quite high where the lambs are fed those rations.
Okay. Look, a lot to consider, Mike. You've covered a lot of ground, and I really appreciate your time for coming on and going through it with a bit more detail. I suppose if for the finish, maybe on one line of it, whether you're selling or whether you're buying, sitting down and doing a budget and having a plan in it is really what has to happen in the next couple of weeks.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that's it, Kieran, in a nutshell. It's there's a very useful tool there, that store lamb finishing calculator. So store lamb finishing calculator. Go onto the Teagasc website and type it in, or just type it into Google. It should pop up there. It's an Excel sheet. It's available to everybody. You don't have to be a Teagasc client. You don't have to have a login or anything. It's there, free to use for everybody. Plug your figures into it. Check out your lambs, see what weight bands you have, the number of lambs in the various different weight categories, and plug them into that calculator, and you'll have the figures there. It'll tell you exactly what's in it, and then you can make an informed decision. Do you keep lambs? Do you feed lambs? Do you sell lambs? What option do you do?
Mike, good having you on. Thanks again for that.
All right. Thanks, Kieran.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. So over the last 2 episodes, we focused on some of the key things to consider for those with lambs left on farms and those finishing store lambs. As Michael's indicated, there's a lot of different things that can have an impact on it. Having your budget in place, having a plan in place at the beginning is key. Again, I put up that link to the store lamb calculator. You'll also find a host of information on the Teagasc public website on store lamb finishing. That's it for me. For updates from the sheep programme, keep an eye on our Twitter page at Teagasc Sheep. I'm Kieran Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us for more episodes.